Hi everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of Maple's Host the Pro, where we talk with top talents about everything from marketing to business and so much more. Our guest today is Leah Taren, a leading growth advisor, specializes in product-led growth and sales in B2B for scale-ups. She writes about her experience on her blog, podcast, and guides on www.leahtharin.com. Hi Leah, how are you?
Hi, good morning. It's very nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very happy to have you. Can we just jump right in and talk about what does it mean, like B2B growth advisor? Let's talk about what you do.
So what I do is I try to extract a lot of money from B2B companies for the services that I offer. So one of them is if you start at the very top, so the ones that have the most money, I also try to get the most money from them. On a more serious note, I try to deliver value by having an outsized impact with companies where, for instance, like let's say you have a 200-300 people company and you're trying to structure your growth in a way that makes the most sense. That is usually about how do we build our products in some kind of way that engineering doesn't hate everyone and sales is not fighting against marketing and marketing is not blaming the product that they're never delivering. And usually this is about how to structure these organizations in a way that the organizations start to function again. Because growth is in many aspects something about finding what works in an organization and then build, like doing more of it, right? Like scaling what works. And I think that's usually how I engage with these companies. So I advise exclusively on leadership, so like CEO or higher. So sometimes also with the board and VC funds and so forth. You know, like I try to just advise companies from the very, very top. What I also do is like if we just go now one step a little bit lower, so not like these pure enterprise customers, I do workshops around product-led growth where I just teach people on how to do this themselves from a first principles perspective. This is usually for companies that are a little bit smaller, so 50 to 100 people, where they try to really understand what are the good principles of something like this. They usually don't have the challenges that enterprises have, where it's not about like how do I structure the entire organizations, but how do I do growth from an experimentational perspective? How do I define things that are measurable afterwards? And how do we react to markets that are evolving right now very hard? You know, like with AI, with getting commoditized and so forth and so forth. So I teach people everything around this on the, as you already said, under the topic of product-led growth.
Okay, let's just ask, how do you approach the, how do you define key metrics for measuring product growth?
So I think it's a very interesting question in regards to what your customers do until they pay. And a very typical misconception that I have mostly from sales-led companies is that they do not understand very well what the customers are doing in their products. So sales-led companies are usually always measuring how many people are coming into the product, how can we move them through the pipeline, so like how many of them are becoming qualified, how many of them are big enough, how many of them can we hand off to sales and so forth, and then, you know, like closing, monetization and so forth. So these companies are very skilled in this particular kind of process, but everything that comes before monetization is completely unknown. And that is usually a topic if you start to bring in a trial or some kind of freemium motion into your product, then you have a lot of people who are using the product before they even talk to you. So there's no salesperson in the pitch. Sometimes there's self-serve, of course, right? But like this entire behavior of how people are using your product is an underappreciated art. It's kind of somewhere in the corner where nobody's looking or like nobody is looking in the product. And the reason for this is that we rely too much on product sense. So a lot of these companies are fooling themselves into thinking that their product is really good, but your product cannot be good if you do not measure it. And what measuring means in this regard is, what does it take for someone to become in love with your product, in the sense of, so usually we define this as the aha moment. So like, is there some kind of measurable signal that we can identify in the product that if that happens, someone really understood what your product is about? So for instance, With Instagram, it would be that someone likes a picture, because if they like a picture, that means they have looked at it, they have understood what it is about. This is now the moment where they understood the product. That does not mean that they're loving it, but it means at this point they have enough information to understand what this is about, to make a decision on whether they want to keep continuing using this. So this is the very first step where companies kind of get a measurement of, okay, from 1,000 people, we can bring about 50 or 500, if you're really good, to this aha moment. And then the question is, how do I bring now people who understand what this is about to a eureka moment where they really love it before we start to monetize them? And this kind of process is measurable and also incentivizable. That means you can put teams onto this. So we can actually say for a month, we want to increase the amount of people who are coming as visitors to the page, to this aha moment, to this eureka moment, to being monetized. We can increase this by 10%, by 15%, or whatever it is. And we just want to see what a team can do in this sense. And this is not very common for a lot of these companies because they only measure how many people are paying. And this entire process is way too long to just let it go by itself.
Do you feel like it's a psychological understanding of the customer's journey from, I don't know, clicking let's try this, or a freemium, if there is? I mean, not all products have a freemium option. Is this a psychological barrier, or is this something that can be solved completely technical when you're advising? I mean, what do you see?
Yeah. So let's take the example of Salesforce versus HubSpot. So Salesforce is one of these really old products that are solving a very big problem, which is like managing your sales pipeline, like as a CRM and so forth. And one specific problem that huge products like these have is that their interface is just not that good. And there's a lot of reasons for this. It has been growing historically. You have integrations in other companies. You cannot change it anymore that fast and so forth. But why are you ending up in a situation like this is because you just do not have enough data. And you have to always ask yourself, if we do a free, like a trial or a freemium, if you want to be extreme, what am I getting out of this? It's not just pipeline. It's not just about, oh, we have more people who want to use the product, right? Because usually a lot of leaders also have a justified fear of, oh, like this is going to cannibalize our market because now we're selling something for $50 that was originally $5,000. What it really gives you is it gives you much more behavioral data instead of just firmographics in how your product is used. So for instance, let's say you have a lower B2B market product. So like you're selling something to micro businesses. And that micro business would be someone, a solopreneur or up to 10 people. So like a small agency. And your product is for this. A typical conversion rate would be per 100 businesses that are looking into your solution, you can convert 5 to 10% of them. That's a very standard rate. That means still you have about 20 people per one that is converting that are still also using the product in some way, right? Like they're trying it out, they're giving it a try and so forth. So you have now 20 times more data to experiment around the interface to make it easy to use. And this is what a lot of companies do not really understand. Even if you're selling to enterprise customers, there's still people, actual humans, using these products. So we can take learnings from this kind of down market segment, test our interface to make the product better for the enterprise segment. At the same time, we can take the learnings that we have from the enterprise segment about pricing, about qualitative interviews, like also leveraging what sales does because they're talking a lot to users, and then feeding this back into the product. But like marrying these two kind of worlds is the difficulty and the art in the end on how to do this. But if you want to condense it into 2 sentences, then one is classical sales-led businesses are really good in identifying firmographics. Who am I talking to? How big are the companies? Who is the buyer? Whereas product-led companies are really good in identifying behavior. So how are they using the product? And if you bring both of these together, then you have a winning strategy, because you know when someone is ready to buy before they even contact you. And you will also know how they use the product before you call them. And that leads to lower CAC, that leads to higher closing rates. It just makes your pipeline extremely efficient. So that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Are there like specific tools or methodologies that like you recommend for making data-driven decision making? Because it sounds like that's where we're going.
Yeah. So a very common thing is that there's no data at all in this regard. And companies tell me usually like, yeah, we do data collection, and then it's usually Google Analytics, and that just is not good enough, right? So what we are looking for is like whether you go with Amplitude, Mixpanel, Pocus, or whatever, like you need some kind of data tracking stack that allows you to track something that has nothing to do with your pipeline. So a good example is, let's say we identify this aha moment and we say like, okay, if somebody does this particular thing in the product, then whenever it does happen, this event needs to be sent into some kind of tool or some kind of database where you can pull it out again. So whatever your tooling is, you want to use something that is able to kind of leverage this and visualize it to people who are using it afterwards. So like if you have a very technical organization, then it can be just like an SQL database. If you have a very sales-driven organization, then you need something like Metabase or Looker or Growthbook or Amplitude or Mixpanel, because they show you in an interface at the very least on how to like how does this data behave, right? And then from there, like after you have these first steps, then you're just going from there. But this is not something where I say that you should do this alone. You should probably get someone in that has some knowledge about this, like a data scientist or someone, or really good growth PMs are also quite good at this. And then if you are becoming more advanced and you think more about not individual users, but more like about accounts, because you're selling to mid-market or enterprise segments, then you need more advanced tools. And that's typically where Correlated comes into the play, or Pocus. These are really fantastic companies that are looking more at analytics on a team and account-based level rather than individual users, because individual user tracking is not that useful if you're going more into an upper market segment in that regard. But it's there's a lot of tools out there, but you need to kind of start always with understanding what is the customer's success points that are measurable.
Do you think that 2024 is going to bring something new to the table when it comes to growth with AI? Or I don't. What trends do you think are going to come up in 2024?
So we have a very specific trend that is already validated in 2023. Which we know that the industry is working towards. So because of AI, it becomes much easier to create products. If it becomes easier to create products for the same amount of market, what that means is that you're moving into a landscape that is being commoditized. And commoditization means same market with much more offerings to do the same, which means this is going to push down your prices and so forth. The only way to escape this, and I did a survey on this with Pocus together and with KeyPlay, where we asked like, hey, what is the one thing that worries you the most as a go-to-market leader? All of them say, oh, we want to move our market. We need to become more efficient. They want to escape this kind of movement. And the only way to do that, so to go more up market, to escape this kind of commoditization, it doesn't matter whether you're doing it with AI or not, is to become more vertical. So that means you have to become much more specialized. Why is that the case? Because if you are creating not just like a social network or whatever your product is, but you are creating a social network for doctors in Spain, then your overall market has become much, much smaller, but you're also much more able to address them much easier. And you have to get really uncomfortably narrow to execute better. And a lot of companies are afraid of this because they think like their market is getting too small. But I can tell you, in the last 2 years, I don't know how many companies I've spoken with and I have advised, but I've never seen any company fail because their market was too small. it's always that they cannot address the market that they're in, because it's always easier to just design for a very, very small, uncomfortable, small segment and then expand, because you're still going to get adjacent customers all the time. But so the smart sentence in this that you can put on a teacup is usually, it's better to succeed in a small market than miss an entire one. And that's a trend, right? So we see this vertical SaaS is clearly an outlier.
Okay. Yeah, we see this in other aspects as well. I mean, content creators are moving to more specific niches. I mean, micro influencers are getting more and more attention. And marketing is going to a more personalized space. So I feel like it just makes sense that that's what's going to happen with big companies and big markets as well.
I think there's a very good point there that you say, because I'm also one of these binfluencers. I call it a binfluencer, like business influencers, and bin because we have ideas that are for the bin sometimes. So I'm very targeted. All right, so like I'm very, very targeted. So what do? I advise B2B companies or like B2B scale ups in SaaS about how to bring product like growth into the market. Now, this is a very niche kind of, it's not super niche, but like it's a very, very clear definition of who my customers are. And one of my lovely competitors, who is McKinsey, is kind of like this poster child of like this old type of advising, where they just try to fix everyone. Right, like they try to fix everyone at the very top, like there is with the biggest companies, like they come in and then they hope that they can fix some kind of inconsistencies. And what we right now see is also like moving towards this kind of segment, is that by having more access to people like me who are very specialized for very specific problems, we are starting to take now market shares of these very, very big companies slowly but surely. Because we're just simply better in addressing the very specific problem that we are trained on, right? Like my brand is just that. I just do this. I do not advise companies on how to restructure their swimming pool or like how to charter helicopter flights. I'm not claiming any of this. But one of the problems that we used to have in the past was, how do you find any advisor that is worth their money and that can actually solve the problems that they claim to do? Because I cost a lot of money. I'm very expensive for these companies. So what do? They do due diligence on me. And so they go, for instance, to the VC funds that I work with, or like other startups that I have worked with, and they do due diligence, right? Like they do check. It's not just like whether there is a growth advisor. They have to check whether did what she claims, what she promises, did that work in other companies? And this is why in this particular segment, you would pick someone like me over a big consulting firm like this. Yeah. So this is a good example. Exactly.
Yeah, I love it. What other challenges do you see companies have or going to have in 2024 when it comes to growth, product? I mean, the works.
So for AI, this is a really interesting one, because everybody wants to implement AI, but nobody really tells you how. And I think I've started to kind of formulate a mantra that I put into every meeting where I'm getting asked like, hey, so should we do something with AI? Should we not? And this is a good example for anything that you're adding into your product. If a big initiative of something that you are afraid of and you're not sure on how to implement it, right? Because money is now tied and you're scared for your company, right? Like, let's put it in this way. Anything that you do that does not change the pricing of your product is probably not worth doing. And what I mean with that is that we see a lot of companies trying to get on the AI hype train, right? Like it doesn't work anymore in the sense that you say like you have AI, but then it doesn't really do anything. Like customers are now having expectations. They know kind of how this stuff works, right? Like, and the proof is now like whether you can write a letter with AI. The proof is like, will I use it on a daily basis to make my kind of processes simpler? And we see this from a really good report that OpenView and Paddle has published. Only if you also changed your monetization around these new features, these companies actually were able to leverage to be an outlier, like a positive outlier in this regard. And what I mean with that is that if you just added just because, but you're not changing anything about your value proposition, or like why you think that you have the right to be the best in what you claim to do, then it's probably a bad implementation. So have an idea before, like, what are we changing? Like, are we becoming now the most efficient in so and so because of AI? Or is it just like a poster feature because I want to have marketing say that we're now AI driven? Because just having it on the tin does not do anything anymore. It still needs to prove that it improves retention. And retention you need to measure. And if you cannot measure this retention, then you're going to lose out to other companies who do measure it. So to answer your question, you have to measure not only adoption, but also retention of your product, because otherwise you're not going to innovate around this. Because, like, it's changing like every week now, right? Like we have new products, new stuff here, Gemini, ChatGPT 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. If you want to stay ahead of this, you need to know what the retention looks like in your product, and you need to measure it.
Yeah, and also, how do you strike a balance between acquisition and retention? I mean, that's another challenge. That's what I feel.
That's true. So we also have data on this. So if you just compare acquisition and retention, if you change one of them by 1%, so what is the outsized effect of it? Acquisition results into 3% better growth, whereas retention is resulting into 9% more growth if you get it right, right? So like if it goes into a positive percent, of course. And so, but it also means that if you're not measuring it and you're changing something about your product, that you can deteriorate it by 9%, right? It's like on the retention side. So why are a company not doing this? The reason is that acquisition flows are very visible from other companies. So it's very easy to latch onto this and think like, oh, look what they're doing. We should do this too. Whereas retention is a very individualistic metric inside of your company that is very hard to validate towards the outside world. Like you cannot just say like, oh, they have a better trial offering or whatever. Like the way that people use your product is much more hidden inside of your organization than it is to the outside. And then the last reason is that there's a lot of material that teaches you on how to do acquisition right. It's a very marketing driven thing. It's a very, as I said, it's very public, versus how do you get retention right is the $100 million question that you can only solve with really good product and growth people. There's no other way around this. And that's why a lot of companies cannot do it, even if they understand that they should do it.
Do you feel retention is something that can only be cracked by an experience understanding, by a psychological understanding, or is it data driven as well, or is it both? Like you said before, like we mentioned it before, but I think retention is something that maybe companies look and say, this client will stay with us. I'm not worried. I mean, they want to hook, but they don't think about the day after.
Yeah, I mean, you can do this. You can do this if you have sales clients that are signing your contract with you for 2 years. But if you're starting to get disrupted from a down market segment that is offering the product at a fraction of the cost, and that just like drives much closer to the road, look, in the end, if you have no incentive inside of your product or like your organization to check constantly whether someone is going to renew, then you're not going to do it. Of course not. Right? Like it's not enough if the CEO stands in front of the company and says like, oh, we should be customer centric. We should make care that all of our customers are renewing. That's not happening just like that, right? Like these philosophical wishful thinking, it's just not doing anything. So what should you do instead? What you have to do instead is you have to measure it exactly like you said. It needs to be data driven, because if your customers individually are paying less and less and less, then you can afford less and less and less salespeople who are going after your accounts and are pampering them on the back and telling them like constantly like, hey, you should renew, you should renew. It's also not a good process in the end. It's very, very difficult to advertise and to sell a product that is not good. And retention is a different word for having a good product. That's just what this is. And if another company gets this right and you don't, then you're an acquisition-driven sorry, like then you're an acquisition driven behemoth that is just not, yeah, like it's just not going to solve.
So, any last advice for businesses, marketers watching us, listening to us?
Yeah, charge your batteries before you go into an interview. And the other thing is, yeah, you have to start to really obsess about your customers, of course, right? Like we always say this, but then you also need to make it objectively measurable, because if you don't, then you will have absolutely no chance with improving it continuously. Don't overestimate your product sense. It is not as good as you think it is.
Leah Taren, thank you very, very much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.